Okay, reading John, finishing up chapter 1 and then going into chapter 2. What's interesting about the Gospel of John, as I mentioned before, is understanding two things. First of all, two words, context and co-text. Context is the story behind, in the story. Co-text is how they arrange the stories with other stories. And we have a habit of pulling stories out of narratives and not looking at why that was placed there, what purpose. And so as I began this thing, we wanted to take a look at how John is getting us ready to understand one of the most important stories in the Gospel of John, and that is the story of changing the water into wine. Very important story. And so my first question to myself as I studied this was why? Why did John choose this story to begin with? What's its purpose? What's its impact? Not only to his audience, but to us. He's trying to communicate something to us, or to his audience and then to us, a message about Jesus and about us and our faith. And so as I began looking at this, I can't help but to notice within these stories of John, the Old Testament creeps in so much into these stories. And I said I'd ask myself, well, why is that? What does it tell us about his audience? I can tell you they understand more about the Old Testament than we do 2,000 years later. We have been, I don't want to use the word negligent, but we've been lazy in going back and learning Old Testament stories. And the reason it does that is because as you look at John and his reliance on the Old Testament, one begins to ask, well, is the audience Jewish? And I would have to say, not necessarily. That in the first 3 centuries, evangelism was conducted by two things: the Holy Spirit and the Old Testament as the Word of God. And so they'd be teaching these stories even to the Gentiles. So the audience is well aware of the influence of the Old Testament in these stories. We're not so keen on that. And so sometimes we kind of move past the story and not really connect with what's going on. Now, as we look at John, to answer the question why he chooses this story is really about us. It's about how the story impacts us. What does it inform us about Jesus? What does it inform us about discipleship? What does it inform us about ourselves and our faith? How does it encourage us? How does it encourage us about our faith? How does it encourage us about our life that we spend here on earth? And how does it inspire us? And so these stories are meant to do those 3 things. Now, we're not always going to look at the inspirational issue, how it inspires us in every story. But in every story, John is saying, you need to be encouraged. Now, remember, he's writing to a second generation, most likely, toward the end of the first century. The witnesses have all gone. The apostles have all gone. John's there, and the church is left on its own. And so you're going to see John spending a lot of time talking about discipleship in terms of the church as it grows. And I think that's important to note as we look at this. Now, I also mentioned a couple of things about John or about any letters. Whenever you're looking at a gospel or a letter or a book within the Bible, remember that it was written to stand alone. And in that, you're going to find if a term comes up, it's going to be defined within the story, within the gospel. All right? And one of the stories that the water talks about is about the passage he says, where he said he came to his own, and his own did not. No, he came to his own, and those who received him were able to have the ability to become children of God, not born of flesh. So what does he mean by those who receive him? What does it mean by that? And so this first story is going to talk about that definition, what it means to receive Christ, and how that's important to our life. It is so important. So we begin with his discussion with Nathanael. As you know, Philip went and got Nathanael to come in. But I want you to notice that in these disciple stories, two things comes out. Number one, Philip will call him the Son of God and the King of Israel. Now the Gospel of John will define what he means by that, the Son of God, what it means by the King of Israel. But if you notice, every time somebody went to get somebody, they brought him back to Jesus. They didn't explain to them why they thought Jesus was it. They just said, come on back and meet this guy. I want you to keep that in your mind. That's important. And so the question was, well, how do they know that Jesus is the Son of God? And how do they know he's the King of Israel after one meeting? Now, as you know, in narratives, you don't get the whole story. And so how did they know that Jesus was the Messiah? How did they know about him being out of the prophets and out of Moses foretelling? And it comes down to this, I think, my opinion, is Jesus told them. Jesus told them who he was. And he used the Old Testament to prove that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. We don't get that. We just get the end result. Sort of like if you invite somebody over for dinner, you do everything before then. You mow or you have your husband mow the lawn, and you cook and wash the dishes and get everything out. And so when the people get there, they don't see all the stuff that you did to prepare. Well, in the same way with narratives, you don't see everything. You just see the end result. And so before he begins this story about changing water into wine, he begins to tell you that the story is about how to receive Jesus. The only question that comes up to me is, why does he need to tell Christians these stories? Remember, in those days when you wrote a book or wrote a letter, it was to an audience. You didn't have a publishing house. You didn't have a library. You didn't have a bookstore. And so these gospel was written to Christians. Why? Why was it important? And again, the answer to that is, how does it impact you? Us. That's how you define why he chooses this story about receiving Jesus. And why is that important in our lives? Now, remember I told you about fire. As a child, you were told the stove is hot. And your mother said hot, H-O-T, your father said hot, H-O-T, and they told you not to touch it. Yeah. But when you touch it, then you know what hot is. Not just intellectually, but you've experienced it. When you look at these Gospels in the same way, when you look at the Gospels in the same way, it's giving you an experience to know something. All right, so Nathanael says in 48, Jesus says to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. And Nathanael said to him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Those are two terms we're not familiar with. John's going to make us familiar with it. Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. What does it tell us about our faith? It tells us that we come to believe, but that belief is going to be strengthened by other things that we experience along the way. You will see greater things than these. And he said to him, truly, 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 whenever you see this in the book of John, you need to stop and take notice. All right? Truly, truly, I say to you. In other words, you can trust what I'm going to say, all right, because I am the truth. And we'll see that later on. You will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. What image comes up to you from the Old Testament?
Jacob's ladder.
Jacob's ladder. How many of you are familiar with Jacob's ladder, the story? All right, tell me about Jacob's ladder. What do we know about Jacob's ladder?
He wrestled with an angel.
Yes, that's later.
Well, he
Jacob's ladder.
He was running away
He was running away
from his brother.
Esau because he deceived his brother Esau, which is interesting because Philip, was it Philip or Nathan who had no guile? Anyways, Nathaniel. But Jacob did have guile. He deceived Esau, so he's running away from Esau. And so he gets a dream. In a dream, he sees a ladder going up heaven, angels coming up and down. Who's on top of the ladder? Do you remember? It's the Lord, who then explains to him what he must do and explains to him the blessings he's going to get. All right, so you see right from the start, you're going to see some things here in this next story that's going to be about learning what to do, learning how you are blessed. All right, so it's a way of kind of a tease to get into this next story. And so Jesus is telling them about something important here, about the role that Jesus plays. All right, so now that we have an understanding, do you see what I mean by they had an understanding of these stories that we don't have? Very important. All right, chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day, now, John will always do this throughout the letter. He'll either say the next day, or the second day, or the third day. It's a literary tool to say he's changing the story. Something's changing. All right, he's leaving the disciples behind. He's moving into another story. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus was also invited to the wedding with his disciples. Weddings in those days was a week-long event. It wasn't just that 1 hour or 2 hours. My cousin's son got married. It was a 3-day event for that family. I mean, 3 full days. I'm like, whoa, you know, I can handle maybe a couple hours, but 3 whole days, which was amazing, before they sent him off. But it was amazing. So this is going on for a week. And that means food, that means drink, that means partying, that means music, that means dancing, that means families, that means getting together. And the whole village is invited, all right? Now the mother's invited, and so Jesus is there, and of course he's invited because he's there, and he's Mary's son. And the disciples are invited. It's probably thought that one of either Philip or Nathan belonged to this village. And so that's why the disciples were invited. So we know who the characters are within the story. It's Mary, Jesus, and the disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." Interesting question. She turns to Jesus and says, "They have no wine." So what? They have no wine. So what? Woman, what does that have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. That is a literary technique that John is putting in here to say that Jesus' ministry has not yet begun. All right? We know from the Synoptic Gospels that Jesus' ministry begins at Capernaum, right after the arrest of John the Baptist. In this story, we tell that John puts this in here to tell us this is before Jesus' ministry. So it has something to say about his ministry, has something to say about his disciples. All right? My hour has not yet come. And because he calls her woman, I've always thought woman, If I addressed my wife, Jerry, as woman, I'd get a smack alongside the head. But that's not true in this case. In this case, it's just a term that they use. He's not meaning anything behind it. What does this have to do with me? Hour has not come. And from the next line, his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." So that it was not a rejection of what she was asking, that he intended to do something. All right? He intended to follow her directions. So now we're introduced to the servants. And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Bingo. If you don't know how to receive Jesus, this is the first lesson, what it means to receive Jesus. Do whatever he tells you. All right? Now, there were 6 stone jars there for the Jewish rites of purification. What are the Jewish rites of purification, by the way? Anybody know?
Washing with hands and feet.
Washing with hands and feet, washing your utensils. Remember when they went to the Samaritan village, she said that you had to you purify what you were getting because the utensils could get some unrighteous things to it, and so it meant for the washing not only hands and feet but also the utensils. And they use stone jars because that does not connect with the unclean stuff. So it doesn't cling to that. There's no magnetism there to get the unclean stuff. So that's why they use the jars. All right, 6 stone water jars there for Jewish rites of purification. Does that tell you something about receiving Jesus? Okay, just keep that in your mind. Each holding 20 or 30 gallons. 20 or 30 gallons, that's a full gas tank. 6. That's a lot of wine.
It's a big party.
It's a big party. Think about that. 20 or 30 gallons times 6. That's a lot of wine. Think there's a message there? All right. Jesus said to his servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it out. Now, we don't know when the water turned into wine. Did it turn into wine when it was in the jars? Or did it turn into wine when they put it into the containers? We don't know. So they took it. They followed what? Jesus' instruction. Well, we already told that. Imagine you being a servant. You didn't know who Jesus was. You didn't know who he was. But he said he's going to turn this water into wine. And he wants you to take it out and take it to the head guy. Not knowing whether you're going to pour water into the glass or wine into the glass. So that tells us a little something about servanthood, doesn't it? So this whole story is beginning to talk about doing what Jesus tells you to do. Begins to talk about discipleship, talks about what it means to receive Jesus. And when the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants had drawn the water anew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have get the good wine until now. This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Interesting story. It has a lot of impact on us, or and me anyways. The understanding that to receive Jesus is about obedience to Jesus. And so you begin to see how he's defining the Son of God and how he's defining the kingship of Jesus in terms of relationship, not just with the Father, but with the disciples. So there's a relationship here brewing. And it's interesting that John says this is the first of his signs. John will talk about 7 signs within his gospel. This is the first one. And it's meant to manifest to the world and to us who this Jesus is and what it means to be a disciple, receiving of Jesus. So, having said that, how does this story then impact us? How does it encourage our faith? How does it inspire us as Christians? Well, first of all, we're always going to be invited to things that may not be part of our circle of influence. The seminar we're going to go to this weekend is about bridging gaps between us and our culture, which I think is very important. Not that we act on our culture, but that we understand our culture and we can speak to our culture, all right? So that we know our audience. Very important that we understand our culture. So the first thing is understanding that we're going to come in contact with unbelievers, I guess is the best way to put it. Those who are not sharing our faith. What does it tell us about Jesus? First of all, we get an indication of where Jesus got his compassion from, right? From his childhood, from his mother. You know? His mother taught him about being compassionate. And so we understand that Jesus is being compassionate in this story, which tells me that he not only cares about me, but he cares for me. Even in the simple things in life. You know, just having wine and a meal, you know, at that wedding feast. He cares about the family, that they not become dishonorable. Now, we don't understand honor and dishonor in our culture like they did. All right? They would have been shunned. The marriage would have gone off on a bad note. The marriage with the people would have been shunned. There was a lot of animosity toward them. So Jesus cares about how they are received in their village. Now, we wouldn't consider that a big thing, but Jesus does. So that tells me that Jesus cares about us as well as cares for us. He understands our simple needs as well as our big needs. He understands what we're going through in life. And I think that's important to understand. As King and as the Son of God, he cares about as we suffer in life, even in the little things. You know, I remember one time I preached a sermon. I may have told this story, and I apologize if I have. I remember one time in a sermon I was talking about prayer or something, and this little 8-year-old girl came up to me. You have the invitation. And the little 8-year-old came up to me, and she asked me for prayers for her dog. Her dog wasn't doing well. Little things. And so everybody was sitting there in the audience wondering, what's he going to do? You know, how is he going to treat this? And so I bent down to the little girl, hold her hand, and said a prayer for her dog. Well, of course, you know, I got comments, good and bad, but it was important for her to know that God cares about her dog. All right? Not because it's a dog, but because it was special to her. And I think that's good for us to be encouraged with. Jesus knows what we're going through. And he knows even the little things are important to us. You know, a little child will cut their hand, and to them, you know, they're going to bleed out and die. You know, but as a parent, you just kind of put a Band-Aid on it, you know, because it's just a little cut. But to them, you know, they're going to bleed out and die. I know that because that happened to me. But the idea is the same God. So right from the beginning, Jesus says, I care about every aspect of your life, about your honor, and about who you are. Now, when Jesus does act, we are encouraged that he acts in a big way. He doesn't just change a little bottle of wine. He changes 60, how many gallons did we say there was?
30.
You know, 30 gallons in each, times 6.
180.
Thank you very much. 180 gallons of wine. So this little thing turns into this big response. But not only does he change it into wine, but he changes it into great wine that people will notice. And so it's just not the simple things that Jesus is doing, it's the greater things Jesus is doing in our lives. And so we see these things as so important. So this story was chosen to encourage them in the life that they're going to experience. That Jesus understands that being the Son of God and being the King of Israel means that Jesus cares and Jesus responds. All right? He's not isolated. Think about kings and how they are isolated from their subjects. How easy is it to get to the President of the United States? Isolated. You know, and sometimes presidents get in trouble because they're too isolated. And they get away from what the people are really thinking and doing. And I think that's important for us to understand. This king of Israel is not one who is going to be isolated. He is going to be very involved in our lives. And so we begin to see how John is going to shape his gospel. It's all about the compassion of Jesus. And he's going to define what it means to be both the King of Israel and Son of God. All right, so I'm going to open up this discussion because my voice is getting a little sore. So let's talk about, first of all, what does this story tell us about Jesus? What does it tell us about ourselves?
Can I ask you a question? Could we also look at this as when Jesus did what his mother asked, he was also honoring his mother? Can you look at it that way too, as part of it?
Yes, yes, yes.
We can take that message from it also. There's so many messages from so many of these stories. It's how you look at it and what you see and what you think.
I think that's a very good insight, that he does honor his mother. Also says that she honors him, right? So that is a key to the relationship between Mary and Jesus, which I think is important.
Yeah, because I think about that a lot, you know. A lot of us have sons, and what is our relationship with our son, and what was her relationship? And she knows who he is. Has to know who he is. And how did she carry that? You know, I think about that. How knowing who your son is, I don't even know how to express what I'm thinking, but how does she relate to him? How does she, it would seem like it would be kind of a burden almost.
Well, yes, and in the way he honors her, I think is important as well. He honors her not just because he's the mother, but imagine her asking Jesus to do this. You know, asking him to do this. And that says something about us when we approach Jesus. It's okay to ask Jesus to help somebody else. Right? It's okay. Right? But yeah, that relationship, she doesn't know everything about Jesus. She won't know yet and he probably doesn't know yet what's going to happen. We don't know. We kind of try to figure out what he knows and when he knows it. And but we do know this is before he begins his ministry. And she knows what he will do, or asks him to do something. She doesn't tell him to change the water into wine. It may be something else that she's thinking about him kind of smoothing things out, but it tells us something about Mary as well. That's a good point, honoring his mother. What else? What else can we get from the story? Okay?
And I don't know if this applies, but in those times, the water wasn't fit to drink. And so they did not have the wine to offer to their guests. That was very insulting.
Yes, you're right. This is water that, well, it'd be like toilet water for us. Can you imagine making coffee with toilet water? So yeah, I can see everybody's faces. Yeah, this would be a real insult. You're absolutely right. Wine was used in those days to purify water. And so wine was always part of their thing, so. But
Wine, purified water,
Yes, it
alcohol. How'd they do
Okay.
that?
Alcohol content. Alcohol.
I'm thinking about the miracle that Moses did when he struck the rock and he got water, and he didn't need wine then. I mean, that's kind of a quirky thought, but back then they didn't need the wine.
They were in two totally different places too, though, weren't they?
Yeah, well, yeah,
so think
but
about that. Think about taking toilet water and making it into fine wine. What does that tell us about Jesus' relationship with us? He's taken us as toilet water and purifying us and making us into servants. We're beyond that. Talk about hospitality. That is the key to hospitality, God's hospitality. He can change the dirty of us into clean stuff. And not just clean stuff, but great stuff. Right? So again, this idea of changing water into wine has much greater impact on us than we might have thought. What else can we get from this story?
Well, Jesus has been away from home. He went down to Jerusalem to John the Baptist. And I don't know any other family members that did, I don't know. But he was baptized publicly, and then the Holy Spirit sent him away for 40 days where he was tempted. And then he began to call disciples, And now he's coming back home with disciples. I don't know where all they stayed, but the family now has to be looking at him somewhat differently because he has returned with fellow Jews. And I don't know, one of them said he was the Son of God and he's the King of Israel that came back with him. There's a lot of backstory here that we're not much thinking. And it doesn't mention his dad either, so I
Yeah, his,
would be odd.
Wouldn't they have
Wouldn't it be
died by
odd
then?
that Joseph didn't come to the
The
wedding?
dad may have
Joseph
died by then.
probably
He a
was
lot older
alive,
than
probably was
most of us.
already passed on.
You know, we kind of assume that, but
That's,
there's a whole backstory to this appearance of Jesus after he went down to Jerusalem. Maybe he went every year, but this.
Well, he went down to, well, he does go, he doesn't make the pilgrimages. In John, you'll see him make pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but he went down to get baptized. And that was, that John, we witnessed through John, the coming of the Holy Spirit, right? And so we have God making a witness of who Jesus is, John making a witness of who Jesus is. The disciples who've seen that and experienced that have made a witness. They turn around to their brothers and friends and talk about their witness about who Jesus is. Okay, what else from the story? There's something very important in the story that I found that we sometimes miss.
I'm still thinking about the toilet water.
I'm thinking about the puppy.
They had the,
Right.
yeah. They, I think it's important to know that the 6 containers there contained some particular water that was used for what? The purification. And they've already gone through that particular process and probably used, everybody there has already used that water, which was for purification. And then the fact that they have no wine, now this is where the disconnect comes in. Okay, what would you think if they were going to fill up those 6 jars with water again? They needed to go through the purification process again, is what I would think if I was there and had that familiar. Now, the idea that it's taken over to answer the question about the wine, to me, I'd never connected that. I would say, oh, he's taking that there saying, we need to go through the purification process again. Now, I just throw that out, that seems to be maybe not necessarily toilet water that they had put in there to go through the purification process again. But maybe it signifies something a little bit different that people were saying, what are we going to do about this wine is, well, yeah, it was an insult, it was things are really bad. We're doing something bad here now, the fact that we ran out of wine. So we got to go straighten this out again. And I would think the purification process would be the one way that they'd want to straighten it out. But Jesus had another idea about, he says, I'm going to fulfill the request about, I'm going to put your culture back in control. I'm going to actually make the wine out of this that was supposed to be used for the purification process. That's just what I got from the story. It's a kind of a entire flip from what the old law or the Old Testament, the idea of purification, to this new that I'm fixing things. This is my process for fixing things in this world, not this ritual that you've been doing to fix things. So
Good thought.
that's my
Larry?
dissertation or whatever.
I kind of wonder, it doesn't say anything about this, but is Jesus and Mary on the same page? You know, she's asking him to do something. I don't think she knew what he was going to do. You know, he could have gone to market or whatever and picked up the wine. I mean, she's making a request. She has faith in him to do something right, you know, but I just, I'm kinda curious if she wasn't as surprised as everybody else, you know, when he did his miracle.
Good point. Who else is surprised in this story?
Well, I'm sure that the servants were.
Servants
They
were
were probably
surprised?
just shocked beyond
I mean, they did exactly what he told them to do. I mean, why, who is this Jesus, and why do I need to do this? Can you imagine going up to a waitress today and saying something? I can remember we went to a restaurant where there was some water on the floor. And so, you know, being a restaurateur, having been in that situation, you don't want anybody to slip on the water. So I told my waitress, you know, there's water on the ground. I think you need to do something. I mean, it was a big puddle. And so she said, we'll take care of it. And what they did, they came out and put a cone there.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, good.
And I'm sitting there going, and then they went by with a bucket and a mop, and they went upstairs with it to another part of the restaurant. And they walked right by it. All right? In this story, we have the servants who are surprised. Who else you think is surprised?
The disciples.
Disciples, okay,
It's
who
the
else?
disciples that this was done for, because when it ends down here, it says, this act in Cana of Galilee was the first sign Jesus gave, the first glimpse of his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Didn't they believe before the story? Did I tell you something else about
Sort of.
how, remember what Jesus said, you will see greater things than these?
They still thought he was there to beat the government
Yeah,
and get the Romans out of there and be their king.
yeah.
They didn't know he was gonna do miracles.
I think they accepted him on, like what we do on face value. We accept you, if you tell me this, I'll accept that. But then when he showed them
The proof
His
in the
power.
pudding.
his power,
Or,
then they were like, oh, yeah, oh, yeah,
oh, he's gonna be a great
I got it,
king.
yeah.
I've got one that
No, you're
was
all-
surprised.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm looking over here at Belle's feet, and there's dog food down there.
Yes, there
And
is.
then I'm thinking, well, she's preparing this food and everything. The person, and I'm wondering about that, because the one that's really surprised is the one that says, hey, I've got the wine, I've got to now serve it. Here it is, I got to serve it, and it's better than what I was gonna serve from him. So I got to thinking about, is that dog food reserved for us, another meal, or what's the situation there? But I think that person was very surprised that
Yes.
it was good wine.
So we'll be surprised at lunch, is that what you're saying?
I don't know.
The master of the feast.
Yeah, that's
Master
right,
of the
yeah.
feast.
yeah.
The bridegroom. If Mary knew they were out of wine, what do you think the bridegroom knew? And can you imagine what the bridegroom thought when the master of the feast came up to him and told him how good the wine was? Whoa, surprise. I mean, you know, whew,
He was chewing out his new son-in-law.
yeah. Okay, so there are some surprises here in the story that I think are important. The servants, Mary, the bridegroom. So we see this very important story as we begin to get into the gospel and why John chooses this story. You know, what does it mean for us today to receive Jesus?
I think it's such a relatable story even for us today. And it was really relatable for the people of that time. But we can relate to it. We can understand it. It's not something like sowing the seeds, which we're not farmers, we don't understand. But this we understand. Hospitality, taking care of the people that you have there to take care of. That, I mean, I think it's very relatable to us today.
Good point. Sure?
What's interesting is that the servants knew what were going on, and they're probably watching the master and the bridegroom going, what just happened. So they would, I think, would want to excitedly tell them what they saw.
Because they didn't know. When they pour it into the goblet, they don't know whether it's gonna be water or wine, but they did what Jesus explained to them.
It's like if I tell you I got pork in the oven and I pull it out and it's filet mignon, okay? It's pork.
Well, that would be better than dog food. Thank you, Fred. All right, any other comments about this story? I think it's one of my favorite stories. There are some little favorite stories I have in John, and this is one of them. And so, anything else?